Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, and today is episode number 66. Um, so I used to be an immigration lawyer, former attorney. Now I am an entrepreneur, the founder of Laborless, which is a tech startup that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing agency for the immigration space, and which brings you this show. I'm super excited for today's episode. It is, first of all, the first one of 2022. So number 66, 2022. I don't know. There's some number stuff going on here. And it is also the first time that we have a venture capital firm on our show. We've had a lot of tech companies here, many of which have been bootstrapped just because that's pretty standard in the immigration and kind of global mobility tech space. We've also had, a good handful of companies on this show that actually have been funded by VCs and angels and other sort of outside capital formats. And so today is the first time we're talking to somebody who is actually in the business of funding startups and helping them grow. So our guest today is Manan Mehta, who is the founding partner of Unshackled Ventures. And Unshackled Ventures is, we're going to get to like what they do and how they work, but basically their focus is helping foreign-born entrepreneurs come to the U.S. and not have to worry about their visa and make sure that they can actually make their entrepreneurial dreams come true. So a lot of times VC funds are not able to fund foreign nationals because maybe they don't have work authorization here. Their H-1B visa, for example, is tied to a job or something else. So Unshackled supports their founding teams with the visas that they need, and also, of course, the funding that comes along with the VC model. So without further ado, because the point is not me talking about this, Manan, thank you so much for being on the show, and I appreciate you taking the time. I'm super pumped to just talk about your journey and everything that Unshackled is doing.
I really appreciate it, Roman. I'm excited to have this conversation with you and excited where the Q&A can kind of take us. Definitely.
For folks who are here live, watching and tuning in, first of all, tell us who you are, shout yourself out rather in the comments, maybe where you work, where you're located. I always love to know who's watching. And then, of course, as we go, please ask questions or leave your comments. The whole point of doing this live, I could be just doing this on a Saturday afternoon and bang these out one after the other, but I love doing these live because I love having the conversation with folks and answering questions and all that. So please leave your comments here. We already have Sophie, a former Amelie Sophie, a former guest here, chiming in. Thank you, Amelie. Good to see you. Okay, so Manan, I don't even know where to start because I'm like, I want to jump right into what you're doing with Unshackled because I think it's awesome, and we're gonna get to a lot of discussion about that. But I do want to start kind of in the beginning. So I know that you were born in the U.S. in California, but your immigration journey, you're very, very much tied to the sort of immigrant, household immigrant journey. So can you talk a little bit about, I know your dad came here in the U.S., decades ago. Can you just talk a little bit about kind of like your family's immigration story to the U.S.?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you so much for allowing us to kind of share this story and hopefully share stories I've never shared before. And I'm looking forward to some of that. I always think about when we got to the point of Unshackled that I was starting from a point of privilege. Privilege because I was born here. In some weird way, I was the benefactor of sperm and eggs meeting and geographically being born in the United States, right? If you think about the statistical odds of me being born, it's very, very low. And then I get the good fortune of being born here in the United States with no personal control over that outcome. And so at the very beginning of our lives, we have very little say in what we do, let alone where we're born. And for me, I mean this sincerely, that I genuinely feel like I started lucky. I started lucky being born to the parents that I have, being born in the United States, being born when I was born. And it kind of encouraged me along the way to take that perspective of privilege and understand how and why I was so privileged. Like what had to happen for this journey to embark, and forget about Unshackled for a moment, because that happened, 28 years into my life. But there's a lot that happens before that kind of helps you maybe find your pathway. And for me, it really comes down to, how did my parents get to the United States? How did they meet? How did they fall in love? How was I born in California? And then how did my dad do what he did and my mom does what she did to allow me to have this? And so from a perspective, as it may be obvious, I am of Indian origin, and my parents did come to the United States in the 1970s. As Roman, you accurately described, my father originally came. He's one of 4 kids who are all in the United States, who all came to the United States. He's the youngest. And he probably had the easiest pathway out of all 4 of them from an immigration perspective to be in the United States, because he was the youngest, his mother was the eldest, and he could then become a caretaker for her to get his green card in the United States. But he first came to the United States for his master's program at the University of Miami of Ohio in 1970s. And so, again, being the youngest of 4 siblings, he was lucky to have his family around. But while he was being a TA and trying to fight his way through student visa to green card, his brother, who was about 10 years older than him, spent 13 years waiting for his work authorization because he was too old to be a caretaker for his mother. And the pathway to get a green card was already starting to have a backlog for an Indian national. And so if you really think about the good fortune of my father being the youngest, being able to watch his siblings find a way to come to the United States through education, that kind of begins the story of my life. That he went to Ohio, found very little obstacles for his personal immigration journey to stay in the US, to assimilate much faster because he wasn't forced to stay in school. He can go back into the working world. He ended up moving to Texas to work for EDS, which is started by Ross Perot. For those of us who are a little bit older, may remember Ross Perot as a former presidential candidate in the 1990s. And that allowed him to understand just not only the immigration pathway, but also the cultural pathway into the United States. And I think a lot of times people look at immigrants and forget that there's 2 parts to the conversation. There's the immigration and there's the immigrant, right? Immigration can be solved. It may take time, but what can't be solved in a short amount of time is the immigrant journey, is the idea that you don't know anybody, that you don't have those networks, that you don't have maybe the knowledge or the cultural skill set to assimilate very quickly, especially in the 1970s. And so when ultimately my father and mother met and they got married 2 weeks later, and my mom moved to the United States in 1978, they slowly make their way over to Silicon Valley because my dad got an opportunity with HP to work. And HP at that time was a very large, well-regarded company, still is today. And he was able to find his way to this promised land of Silicon Valley, which in the 1980s wasn't as known globally as it is today, but really start to build out his career. 1981, my sister was born. 1984, I was born, and the rest kind of becomes history. And for the longest time, probably between 1984 and I would argue 2010, I never once, as somebody born in the United States, appreciated the immigrant journey. Mm-hmm. I just thought my parents spoke with funny accents sometimes, said words funny because they couldn't pronounce it. And I just kind of made fun of them as any entitled American-born kid might be. But in the behind the scenes, what was happening subconsciously was a skill set, a culture, an upbringing that put a chip on my shoulder, that it was my responsibility to take whatever option I was being given by my parents and do more with it. And so when I finally started peeling back that everything I was doing in my career, all the way from education, getting my dual degrees at UCLA in engineering and econ, to working for a Canadian investment banking firm, to working for a Pakistani immigrant at No, I kept on being drawn to the foreign national story. I didn't realize this until I attempted to start my own company with a co-founder on a visa And I realized that not only was I drawn to the work ethic, I was so blind to the challenges and the adversity muscle that immigrants were building. That is why they've been so successful. And it was in that journey that I reflected back on all of my upbringing, who I kept on working with, who I kept on associating myself with, and realized that maybe I always knew it. I was blind in the sense of awareness, but I was subconsciously very aware that I was drawn to a certain work ethic and a style. And so that's the longer story of just a really a kid with a lot of privilege, right? My father ultimately ran global sales for a company called TIBCO. They're best known today because the founder and CEO owns the Sacramento Kings, the basketball team. My dad did this through the 90s. He retired in 2001. So I saw what it meant for an immigrant who only had 25 years of work experience in the United States go from having very little money to retiring for the foreseeable rest of his life at the age of 50. And so I was given a lot of opportunity. And I'm fortunate that I was raised the way I was so that I wouldn't rest on those laurels of my parents and fortunately build more on top of it.
You know, you make me, it's so funny. So I was born in the Ukraine, and, you know, I came here when I was 2.5. So while legally or technically speaking, I have a different kind of origin story, practically speaking, I'm from here. All my memories are from the US. And I kind of had a similar experience where it was, you made fun, like my parents have a Russian accent, and like you joke about the vodka and about the caviar, whatever.
Yeah.
And you just don't, but at the same time, you grew up in an immigrant household. So there's just certain things that, like, through osmosis, you just kind of pick up, like these immigrant tendencies or the work ethic, or just like the mindset. And it's the same thing. I mean, it hit me differently, but when I happened to get an internship at Fragment, the immigration law firm, in law school, and I was like, I wanted to go into corporate law, and I was like, oh, well, this is like corporate-y, but on the immigration side, so cool. I'll transition eventually to a White & Case or like something cool. And I just, like, immediately it clicked that the people I was helping were people who are trying to come here, and create a better life for themselves, and whatever it might be. And to same kind of thing as you, I immediately started to think back on my life, and I realized, and I don't know if this is true for you, I'm curious, my family just never talked about their immigration story. Like, I feel like I do now because I'm in it, I'm in the industry and whatever, but like, my parents came here and they just looked forward. Like, they just didn't really look backwards and reflect all that much. They might have had memories of, oh, well, back in, I remember this song. Oh, you don't know, you weren't born there, like whatever, kind of little quips, but there was never kind of a reflection on, the fact that we came here and these were challenges, and don't forget. And like, it was just go to school, get educated, get a good job, and like, just look forward. I'm wondering if you had that too, or maybe your family did kind of like reflect as they were going through things on the fact that, wow, we went through this journey and look where we are now, and all that.
Yeah, my parents, I don't think I even knew their immigration journey until about 5 years ago. And that was largely because I started working in the space quite intently and wanted to appreciate what it took. What I would hear growing up was that it was hard at first. More so for my mom, because she came for the very first time, left her city, never had left her city ever in her life, when she got married and she got on a plane to come to America, and she didn't know anybody, and she was homesick. Those stories I would hear, but even those were, the extent that I just shared here is all I would have heard as well growing up, and so it wouldn't be elaborated upon what that meant, what that felt like. What relationships were maybe struggling, what were succeeding. You wouldn't hear those parts of the story. Like the emotional side of things were typically covered up growing up. And I think there was a reason for it. I think there was a ardent belief that this is what it is. And what I have to do is, I have 2 kids and I have to give them a better life. And it's not about looking back or looking forward. It's about staying present in the now. It's dropping all your ego and saying, here we are in America. We know we are not native born. We know we sound different. We know we entered the United States when it was a very waspy culture, and we have to survive. And so whenever you put somebody into a survivalist mentality, they tend to have a lot of benefits, which is usually around narrow focus. Mm-hmm. And they don't get caught up with a lot of the noise. When you give somebody all the opportunities in the world and they have no challenges, they tend to dabble in everything and everyone in every situation, and they don't have the ability to focus as much. And I think that is a true benefit of being the kid of immigrants, is that you grew up in a household that you watch your parents typically have very narrow focus, that are trying to give you an ability to have a little broader focus, but you don't stray too far from the tree because you know there's requirements from your parents, like do well in school, right, do well in this. Like there are those cultural elements that play on top of us, but they're really powerful when you look at it over the course of, for me now, 37 years. And so, yeah, it's seldom talked about. But I will say there's a sense of pride that now comes out. Like just a few months ago, my dad was looking at old photos and old boxes, and he found the handbook that he got in 1972 from the University of Miami of Ohio. And he opened it up and saw a bunch of things that he was writing in, and he showed it to us. And God Almighty, there was stuff in there that is not politically correct, right? That was published by the school. Like it was such a different culture, but it is such a powerful time capsule to say, this is the world they entered in. And this is the world we are in today, where we now understand that there's pronouns that matter to people, right? Like just the shift in 35, 40 years is so powerful. And for my parents to adapt, to respect, and then to raise their kids to understand that, I think is a function of that narrow focus, is that we are going to be successful in this country. We're not going to stick to our ways. We're going to assimilate. We'll have our culture. We'll train our kids in that culture, but we're going to look forward. And that's why I don't think they talk about what their pathway was, because I think it keeps them in the past. Mm-hmm. It doesn't allow them to look at the future and what they can provide their kids.
Definitely. Yeah, I love that. It's so powerful. And it is funny. I mean, as a child of immigrants, even if you're not, you could be like me. I came here. Well, I guess I'm technically an immigrant. You came here first generation. I think even if you grew up with like grandparents, I mean, just to have someone around you that has that philosophy on life and can sort of help guide you. Yeah, I think when I was in college, I wouldn't have fathomed coming home and saying that I'm going to be like an artist. Like that would be a tough sell. I mean, I went to law school. I don't practice anymore, but at least I have that as a backup. I can always say, that's so funny. So I love this. And I want to come back to this shortly when we get to Unshackled and sort of how you look at, your, the demographic you're targeting, which is of course immigrant founders, because I also think that the world is smaller now, right? And you could come to the US and because of internet and social media, you could still have, you could still be tethered to home. Like it's not, maybe not feel as lost, things like that. And I would love to, on a separate conversation, even explore just the idea of what an immigrant felt in the 70s and the 90s and, in 2022. But, to go back to kind of your story. So you graduated UCLA. I'm curious, you said engineering and finance, right? Or economics rather. Did you want to work in finance? Like, were you going down a traditional kind of career path, or what was because I know you went to work, I think RBC, is that right?
That's correct.
So you entered like a quote unquote traditional career.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? I think fruit doesn't fall too far from the tree. My dad is an IIT graduate as a chemical engineer. He is just turned 70 and he's never worked a day in his life as a chemical engineer. And from a very young age, I was always fascinated and interested in math and numbers. I just had a predilection for just loving it. But I also knew I wasn't somebody that could be behind the scenes and work. I grew up around my father, who was a consummate salesman, literally extremely good at that. And so when it came in high school to applying to colleges and declaring different majors or undeclaring, being undeclared in some cases, the one thing that my father instilled in me, and my mother in a lot of ways too, is that go get an engineering degree because it gives you a framework and a way of thinking that you can apply to anything else you do later on in your life. And I really didn't appreciate what that meant at the time, but I for some reason was able to believe that it was the right pathway to go forward. And so I applied to every university as an engineering declared major, ultimately decided on going to UCLA. And after the first year, I realized very quickly that I needed to learn something else because I wasn't personally drawn to the engineering degree at the time. And so being a good Indian kid, instead of changing majors, I added one more major. So I added econ, but I also added one more year of college, which is great, which was the time of my life. And so I was really lucky where my parents actually never forced me down a pathway. They didn't expect anything. And I can give examples of that where my sister played D1 collegiate sports. I tried to walk onto the UCLA baseball team. We were always trained to be well-rounded and attempt to do whatever we wanted. And I think that was a very, very unique Indian immigrant kid story, because all of my other childhood friends did not have so much latitude. And so it wasn't surprising that if I wanted to do something else, I could do it. But, for me, going into finance was really a product of my sister went to Lehman Brothers after UC Berkeley. And I remember telling her this, like, I love what you're learning because I think you're learning your breaking point, right? Investment banking in the early 2000s was very different than investment banking today, but it was 100 plus hours. You had to decide if that's what you wanted to do or not. And I saw her reflect and realize that she learned her breaking point. And so for me, that was really important to start my career. At what point is enough for me? Like, how much can I tolerate? Turned out I joined a firm that I really enjoyed. And I spent 3 years, not 2. I ended one more year and had the opportunity to continue on there. But I also then realized that I'm not learning anything new. And that's when I made the jump to know. But, it is traditional in one regard, but I think the perspective to that point is maybe more untraditional, because a lot of immigrants, kids of immigrants, don't have the ability to think about a job beyond just the financial rewards of it. I was always afforded to think beyond the money. And I think that is, again, another reflection of how fortunate I think I am, and why I think a lot of the work that we do at Unshackled is how do you eliminate the burden of financial to then give you the platform to be more creative to pursue what you want to do.
I love that. That's such a great philosophy. And honestly, immigrant kids or not immigrant kids, I think more people should think about life as a series of opportunities where they're learning about themselves and learning about their breaking point, about their interests, about what drives them, about what deflates them. And sometimes we do learn that, but then we ignore those telltale signs and we stay at the job because of financial. And there's obviously no judgment. People have responsibilities and families and things like that. But I think that's such a great way of looking at, how you take chances with your career and like the idea. And to be fair, you're right. I mean, it's nice to not have parents that will scare you into staying at a job because you just don't want to face them. I've had guests on this show who said, look, when I left my, let's say, full-time job, to start a company or to join the startup or whatnot, I was so scared to tell my parents because they're going to be like, we came to this country, you had a great job, it was everything we had always dreamed of, and you're going to throw it away for this idea, where's the money? Like, where's the stability? And obviously, because they were on the show, they of course got through that and they were successful, but that fear does definitely hold people back. So it's really cool to hear that you had that.
I can't tell you, like, I think that's a really important point, and that's why I want to double click on it, because of where I sit in my background with that decision. It makes me extremely empathetic for the number of founders that I've met and that Unshackled has backed, that literally cannot tell their parents, even after we've wired the money, that they're starting a company. There's something really powerful about, and I think I'm just very fortunate to, have seen those entrepreneurs go through that and then reflect back on my journey and say, wow, I never had that. So maybe what I should do is not just feel proud and lucky, but how do I now give that founder the confidence that we know your parents may not know about this, but you got us. You got us behind you. We will act as your friends and family that won't judge you, that will be by your side, that will give you the support. And hopefully at some point along the journey, you will tell your parents and they will hopefully receive it positively. But there's no guarantee in that. And I don't need to wait for that to do my job. And my job in that case is to be not only a financial supporter, but an emotional supporter for founders as they go through these journeys. Because it's easy to talk about building a company based on what you see in TechCrunch and your fundraising announcements, but there is a lot in between. There's a lot of challenges. And so the benefit of again, the benefit that I feel and the good fortune that I feel is because I'm free of those burdens, I can free up more time for founders that are going through it so that I can help them focus back on what matters, right? And that's our job, is to help entrepreneurs succeed a little bit faster. And that's not always just in money. It's a lot more when you're talking about somebody who's the only one in their family. Oh, and by the way, there is expectation that they send money back to their family every month. Mm-hmm. So when they're taking their $250,000 salary, leaving a very strong, well-regarded tech company, and now taking a salary of $75,000 just to meet prevailing wages, stress goes up, right? There's real life to that. Mm-hmm. And so it's our job as early investors is to help them see that one through a little bit and think of strategies to the extent we can, right? And that's why I'm just so empathetic and so obviously inspired by the work that I get to do, because I'm betting on people that go through a lot more than I think I've ever had to deal with.
So I want to talk about your experience with No, because I think, that's kind of a big step towards you creating Unshackled. So you left RBC, you joined No, that you mentioned was run by, was the founder a Pakistani immigrant or? Okay. So what was, I guess, how did you, I'm sure you learned a lot. So, but I'm curious about your jump to that, and then sort of watching the company go from, I guess, smaller company to bigger company and then being acquired by Intel eventually. Can you just talk a little bit about that journey? Because I do want to get to Unshackled, and I know we're almost there, but I want to talk about that because it's such I feel like a crucial point from, you went from a traditional job to a startup, and now you got to live this sort of entrepreneurial life a little bit internally.
Yeah, and so much of this is fun to talk about in hindsight because you start putting a little more context around those decisions and you realize things don't just happen for the sake of happening. There tends to be a reason for it. So I actually met Osman Rashid when RBC was looking at his previous company as an investment banking client, which was Chegg. He started a company called Chegg, a textbook rental company. And that time back, I think it was 2009, they were looking at securing some bank debt, RBC being one of the banks that they were talking to. It was in that process, I was an analyst, so the most junior person on the team. We came to learn that Osman, the CEO and founder of Chegg, was actually working on something else on the side. And so obviously from a risk mitigation perspective, if you're a bank that's conservative, you want to know what and why, and is that a signal of what's coming at Chegg or is that something else, right? There's questions to be asked. So in a weird way, I was tasked with figuring out what's going on there. And so that's how I got to become aware of Osman and No. In the same time, I saw a family friend of mine join as a VP there, a family friend of my parents that I grew up around, joined as a VP. And I go, okay, something is happening here. And, in those exchanges, in that process, about 6 months later, my 3 years at RBC was coming to an end. And I quickly jumped for 2 months to travel a little bit to South Africa and South America for the World Cup. But when I came back, I sent an email to Osman, and I said, hey, I'm interested in joining your company. I don't know if any positions open or not. And he wrote back to me saying, why would I hire you?
Nice.
And so I actually had to write for the very first time, go beyond just the resume, but write him a one-page letter as to why he should hire me and what I was interested in. He brought me in on October 26th, 2010. And it was a 30-minute meeting, one-on-one with him. And remember, Chegg at that time was nearly $1 billion company. So I'm walking in with a little bit of a bright-eyed, oh my God, this is a tech unicorn CEO. He's talking to me one-on-one. I'm a little infatuated here. And so I walked in quite nervous. And he sat down, and I remember sitting in the boardroom, 30 minutes. He kind of asked the same question, like, why should I hire you? And I gave him a response as honestly as I possibly could, in which was, I'm here to restart my career and learn as much as I possibly can, and nothing will scare me. He's like, okay, you'll start tomorrow.
Wow, really?
I started the following day.
Wow.
I asked to wait the weekend, start on Monday. He's like, nope, you're coming in tomorrow. I said, okay. I got the offer letter and I began. And he told me something in an interview that I will not forget. He's like, why aren't you going to business school? I said, I'm interested in learning more. He's like, great, this will be your MBA. And I tell you, 3 years later, I learned more on that job, more than just my breaking point. I learned how to merge finance with go-to-market and marketing, working with very strong personalities. That was one of the best teams I've ever been around in my career. We ended up raising about $90 million from Andreessen, first round floodgate, very, very high quality names. And that's a lot of credit to Osman. And, you know, it's also where I met Nitin, my co-founder on Unshackled. And he was in the finance team. I was in the marketing team. We both ended up running our respective organizations. And maybe because I had a bit of a finance background, I was drawn to the finance team a little more, understanding how customer acquisition costs, demand generation need to be implicated into our financial models. And we started working closely together. And it wasn't just about a bunch of content that we're putting out there, but measuring content and the actions that were taken. And so that's where Nitin and I got really close. And Nitin left a year before I did, but he was on a visa, H-1B. And so, you know, that obviously led to Nitin first starting to architect what it would look like to build an Unshackled himself. And the rest becomes kind of history. He brought me in. But that no experience not only taught me so much about, you know, a tech company culture, it helped me understand what the VC customer service landscape looked like. You know, sitting in board meetings with Mark Andreessen, I will never forget just his approach. I'm not sure I should have been in that room, but the fact that I was made me appreciate why Mark is who he is and why he's so successful. Understanding how Mike Maple thinks. I mean, these people are very well regarded, some of the OGs in venture capitalists, right? And to be around them, you know, as a 26, 27-year-old was huge for my career.
Yeah, that's a crazy experience. And what like the fact that you can learn just by hearing them and just sitting there and soaking it all in. And so Nitin, I want to take a pause actually, because we have a ton of comments and I'm so into this conversation that I forgot to bring them all up. So Marianne says, your biggest fans from San Francisco. Hey, Marianne, thank you as always for joining. Francesco's, thank you for doing this. Looking forward to the conversation. Immigrant founder in Italy, or from Italy rather, in San Francisco. So thank you, Francesco, for being here. That's really awesome. Shiv, prior guests on this show as well, also an immigrant, also in the immigration space, also a tech founder. So this is just like perfect. Thanks for your comment and for being here. Ashwad says, hey, based in San Francisco, generally interested in being an entrepreneur while being an immigrant in the US. So we're going to talk about that very shortly. Marianne. Okay, so Marianne says immigrant and immigration. The distinction is really important. I love that. That part was super cool. And we have Alfredo here. Alfredo, it looks like your privacy settings don't allow your photo and name to come up, but thanks for telling us your name. Running Darden app from Mexico. So thanks for joining. There's a bunch of comments here. Marianne, I love you for. I'm gonna leave that one just because it's a little bit long, and thinking beyond money is a true gift. So thank you. Just one more comment from Francesco. Incredibly reassuring as an immigrant founder to know that there are venture partners like you, Manan, that have a perspective on how it might feel to struggle. Yeah, definitely. That empathy is important, and I imagine like the emotional side that you're talking about actually holds people back quite often. I'm sure even more so than like their lack of money. Like I'm sure if you have $250,000 a year salary, you could save up enough for 1 year runway, but like you don't want to face your parents. Like that's the thing, you know? So I think that's really interesting. Okay. So I want to jump because I want to be conscious of our time and I want to get to Unshackled. Between No and Unshackled. So No was acquired.
Yeah.
You moved on after the acquisition. So you got to help build it up. You were in all these amazing meetings with Andreessen Horowitz and all these other people and firms. You worked with an amazing founder. Incredible experience, right? Before you started Unshackled, though, as far as I understand, you also started a different company for a little bit of time. And as far as I've read and done the research that I've done, like you kind of became acutely aware of this idea of people being held back from starting a company based on their immigration. So right. I was wondering if you could just very briefly just share a little bit about, that experience. And because I think that is going to be the perfect segue to kind of where Unshackled really kind of started.
So it's a really interesting story, but I'll try to make it as quick as possible. So I mentioned Nitin earlier. Nitin was working on a startup. I was advising. I was brought on to kind of help on the marketing side. In parallel, I started another company where Nitin's company would be the first customers of ours around kind of the go-to-market and profiling of users so that we can acquire them more readily. My co-founder on that company was somebody who was on an H-1B visa. Did not appreciate what that meant. I quit No before the acquisition. When Osman and I discussed it, time to go, I left. I went full time into the next company, right? My co-founder could not. He was still shackled to his H-1B visa. He was still working a daytime job. All he could come and work were nights and weekends. And that too with a lot of wrappers around it, like different laptops, different network. Like there's a lot of things that you have to contemplate, none of which are core or would benefit the company that we are starting together anymore, right? They are all distractions, not benefits. And so it was 9 months into that journey that both Nitin was working a little bit longer, that I was working on my company for 9 months. And it became really clear that this was not just an immigrant problem, this was an American problem. I am the American facing the same problem that my co-founder is facing. Why? Nitin was working on a framework to solve this problem. He had discussed it with a few folks, and on April 1st, 2013, we sat down at, I believe it was Specialties, and he articulated the full vision. Full vision was something different than what it is today. But at that point, we both recognized that both the immigrant and the American were facing the same problem. What would it look like if we teamed up to solve the problem for other people? In the meanwhile, we kept on noticing that every co-working space on nights and weekends was covered with foreign nationals.
Really?
Everyone was moonlighting. Oh yeah, it was fantastic. Like the number of foreign nationals that were working on side projects come around 7 p.m. at these co-working spaces probably went from a ratio throughout the day of 1-to-1 to 7-to-1. Wow. 7-to-1 foreign nationals to US born. And I won't forget that because it was the perfect customer validation scenario for us. Hey, if we had a startup visa act, a privatized startup visa act, could we help you start your company? Would you then leave your full-time job at a Google, an Intel, a Facebook, Meta, right? That was our validation. And that journey really began at a co-working space.
Wow, man. I wish that should be like a research project or a report. I mean, that's so interesting. What a great kind of proxy to understand the demand for what you guys have built. Wow, that just kind of blew my mind. I'm not going to lie to you. That's really really interesting. I thought you were going to say that nights and weekends the co-working spaces were closed, and that's how frustrated you were. And you were like, no, not at all. They were actually totally packed, just with people who you wouldn't expect because they're working full-time jobs throughout the day.
That's right. And they're willing to punch the clock on both ends, right? They're burning the candle. That to me is somebody you want to back.
So that's a perfect transition. So tell me about now Unshackled. For folks who are here who may have heard of it, like how does it work? What's the philosophy? What's the thesis? What does it mean for somebody who doesn't know what the VC model is
Yeah. So Unshackled is today what it was 7 years ago. And we're really lucky to say that we've not changed the strategy and been consistent. We are a venture capital firm that provides your friends and family capital. Today, we write checks of between $300,000 to $500,000. We are investing in 70% of the cases before the founders have even incorporated their business. And where one or more of the founding team members is foreign born. We also provide full immigration support. So we brought in Cerati Law Firm, Michael and Rita, into our partnership to provide full immigration support, including work authorization, so that whether you are on an H-1B or an F-1 OPT visa, or you're in the process of filing your I-140, or you may have your green card, we can support every single immigrant in this country that we want to back. What does that mean? We have now invested in 67 companies. We are investing out of our third vehicle today. Our first fund was $4.5 million. Second fund was $20 million. And our companies today are nearly worth $1.9 billion. And that's by investing at day zero. We fundamentally believe when you get in the corner of somebody that, with or without you, is probably going to start a company at some point, you have a unique opportunity to help them succeed faster, help them focus on things that can add enterprise value, not on things like immigration, not on being an immigrant, giving them access to their networks, giving them access to the right attorneys. And we are industry and vertically agnostic. So we've invested in everything from plant-based proteins to cell towers in space. So truly from ground to earth space. And it's allowed us to really underwrite people. And I say this earnestly, we want to be your friends and family money. And what that means is that if you pivot, we're here for it. If you change your ideas, we're here for it. If you change your teams, we're here for it. In fact, that is more common than not across a portfolio. So we are very patient, recognizing that if you are somebody in this country on a work visa, you are actually at a significantly bigger deficit than somebody trying to come in for the first time. Meaning, if you're somebody foreign living abroad, you can start your company, you can validate it because those laws allow you to do it. If you're in the US on a work visa, you can't really do that. So we recognize if we're going to invest in somebody who's here, we have to be more patient. First, bringing people in.
That's really interesting where like they're actually at a disadvantage by being in the US given the immigration framework.
I never thought about it that way, honestly, until very recently. Nitin actually wrote it out, and I'm like, that's a really profound point. Because if you're here on a work visa, you know what your limitations are. You can't open that email. You can't put on your LinkedIn profile, your CEO or founder. But if you happen to be in Ukraine or in Brazil, you can actually start your company. And navigating it, particularly the US, is not as challenging as starting a company. It's challenging, don't get me wrong, but it's a very different paradigm change and challenge.
So how because there's obviously a lot of immigration nerds that listen and tune in here, including a lot of attorneys. So you basically have a law firm that is a partner of the firm, right? It's not that you outsource to a law firm, like they are part of the Unshackled
Correct.
team. Now, from the perspective of, I understand that you kind of look at the scenario, depending on the founder, you come up with creative immigration solutions. So for some folks, it might be an H-1B visa. For someone else, it might be an EB-1, for example, or something else. Sure. I'm curious, and of course, that would be up to the legal team in part to decide. Do you guys, for the ones that are self-petitions, that makes more sense. The individual founder, maybe they've won the awards and whatnot, they can sort of just get the employment authorization on their own. Where you do have to do a sort of employer-sponsored, does Unshackled actually act as the employer? Like, how does that kind of work a little bit?
So when we created the framework for Unshackled back in 2014, it was a requirement that we would not base our investment decision based on the immigration status of the founder. So what does that mean? We have to have a solution for anyone that we meet that we want to invest in, regardless of they could be on a B1, B2, they could be a DACA recipient, or they could be an H-1B visa holder. If we were going to invest, we were going to invest in them regardless of knowing that fact. And so what that required is a solution that could stand up in all those scenarios. And this is where I give, I think, the team at Unshackled a lot of credit, including, Nathan and myself, where we spent a lot of time understanding what was permissible, what was allowed, and what was needed to be done structurally. So from the very beginning, Unshackled was structured as an R&D technology lab. We are able to deploy our investment capital through payroll to hire people, sponsor their visas, act as the employer, pay the prevailing wages, and it looks a lot like Xerox R&D, Livermore Labs, things that the US government is very familiar with. That allows us to use our balance sheet to invest in these people and also be able to pay the prevailing wages for the duration of whatever visa that may be, right? On top of that, there was considerations around IP, there's consideration on employment, there's consideration about security laws. All those pieces had to be understood uniquely and appropriately, more than any other reason, to make sure that the next investor that invests in our company is completely unaware that we had to do all that, right? Because the worst thing we can do is do all these solutions. And then let's say you are a first round capital and you're doing your diligence and you go, oh, I can't write a check because it's not structured appropriately. They're used to seeing something as a Delaware C Corp with shareholders that are working in the United States and have work authorization. So we have to check all those boxes. And that's effectively how we became the on-ramp to the rest of the venture capital ecosystem for these immigrant entrepreneurs. And yes, that could take the form, and you alluded to it. We've done over 170 immigration filings on behalf of our founders, but they've been across 13 different visa categories to date. With the backdrop of we started this in the Obama administration, went through the Trump administration, and are now in the Biden administration. We've been able to secure visas for 100% of our entrepreneurs because I think our partnership with our immigration partners, Michael and Rita, they are compensated by the firm. So we have actually partnered with our upside in the outcomes of these companies or investments with them so that we do not have to charge our founders legal fees for them going from a F1 first year OPT to an STEM extension OPT to filing their petition for an H-1B to getting their O1, then their EB-1, then their green card. There is no legal cost to that whole journey. Mm-hmm. And that not only gives the founders confidence that they have a long-term partner, but it also lets them go back to focusing on their business. And that's what customer service looks like for us. And I think it's very similar to how other VCs provide certain type of products to their founders, whether it be recruitment services, marketing services,
accounting services.
Yeah. Ours is immigration services. That's our MO, right? And that is how we have built this firm and why I think we collectively are so excited about investing as early as we do because we think we're truly unlocking the potential of somebody that may be shackled due to some policy, some employment, something.
I see what you did there. I see what you did there with the shackled. I love this. I mean, and I think anyone would agree. And man, I'm curious because you touched on the private, startup visa. What happens where in a scenario where the government says, "Great, visa for startup founders"? Do you,
Please, we were closely working with Tom Khalil and Doug Rand in the previous administration, or in the Obama administration. We now work with Engine, which has recently merged with American Immigration Council. We hope that there's an easier pathway, because as Unshackled a firm, we can't support the full demographics. We know that. There are, end of the day, we invest in 15 to 17 companies a year. We're seeing over 2,000. We should not let our judgment or our capital constraint be the reason someone can't start a company. That's a little too selfish. And so we would hope there's an easier way. We would love to use it. We would love to put it in play. But at the end of the day, this is why I disaggregate immigration from immigrant, right? There's still a set of core services that the truth is, and I say this in jest a little bit, but once we solve your immigration, your company value did not go up, right? Congratulations, we gave you your EB-1, your green card, or we helped you get it. We didn't give it to you. We helped you get it. Your company did not go being worth from 5 million to 10 million because of that event. Right. The journey is still very long from that point on. Right. And I think that's where we're building a lot of our skill set, is around being a fund that can support founders all the way through, put a community around them, give them access to resources at every step of the way. Because what we know about a founder, I am fairly confident to say that no other VC will know about them personally.
Right.
And so our ability to help that entrepreneur may be a little bit more unique.
And in fact, most other VCs, because of their immigration situation, will turn them away, and they don't even want to get to know them from that perspective, right? Whereas you guys say, no, we want to lean into your immigration story. There's one interesting question here from Francesco. What about the international entrepreneur parole rules? So that was sort of the Trump administration was talking about that, and then there was like talk of the W visa and having that come back to life. I don't know. And actually, this was going to go towards my last question to you: is what do you see for the future here? You guys, you're working on, you're doing your thing, right? Which is like the quote unquote private or privatized startup visa. You're also clearly in close communication with the administration or with organizations that work with the administration, like American Immigration Council. I don't know, where do you see, like from where you're sitting and what you can share, like where do you see things going along, the entrepreneurship for immigrants route?
So I personally love that we do have an international entrepreneur parole in place, and I love that the Biden administration put it back into place. I'm also acutely aware of how limiting it is. There's no pathway to a green card from it. There's no pathway that has been proven so far, and maybe we need some more cases to be adjudicated, and we'll figure out how that works out. And to all the attorneys on this listening, or who will listen, we're counting on you to kind of help shape how the law ultimately plays out, because I think lawyers end up writing the law a lot more than politicians through their work. And so I'm optimistic that, at some point, we will start to look at foreign national students differently than the rest of the immigrant population. I'm confident at some point and optimistic that we'll start looking at the work authorized visa holders differently than the whole family-based argument. Right. And so what I'm holding out optimism for is that we finally look at the immigration landscape in different pieces, not as just one comprehensive behemoth, so that we can actually push policy through. I think there's a lot of consensus, at least historically, there's been consensus across both parties around, we don't want to lose those that we educate. We don't want to lose those that are paying taxes. And so I appreciate where that can become challenging from a narrative perspective and for our politicians when they are fighting very challenging battles on both sides. But I'm optimistic that we will get there. I don't think it's going to be in the next year or two, candidly. I think there's just a political landscape right now that is not very conducive to policy passing through any kind of it. But I think there's been a lot of good things that this administration has already done, which is restaffing DHS, restaffing USCIS. We're starting to see approvals happen a lot faster than they did years prior. I think that lends to a confidence that you can make an attempt to file a petition to get your work authorization or to work on your startup. Mm-hmm. And so, look, I'm not an idealist. I recognize that there's problems with every policy, but I think there's well-documented proof that immigrants create more jobs in America. Immigrants create more wealth and value in America, and immigrants are a large part why I think our DoD cares so much about supporting them, right? I think there's a national security interest to help immigrants succeed here, because in a global world, the best talent in the world, if they are living in America, can work in America, can innovate in America, keeps America competitive and keeps America strong, right? I think that's critically important.
There's such a desire. The comedian in me wants to say it keeps America great, but
I thought twice before I said
that. That's gonna. I don't want anybody giving this show 1-star review. So, yeah, man, that's awesome, and I totally agree with you. And I was gonna say that we have at least one. I saw a Canadian immigration attorney here joining. Canada has created a startup visa. They have a really interesting provincial nominee program where the provinces can have their own sort of, rules around immigration. So there are definitely creative solutions that perhaps we haven't even thought about, like regional immigration programs that aren't bound by federal rules, things like that. So I agree with you. Maybe not much is going to happen over the next few years, but we're all slowly but surely laying the groundwork, by restaffing, by coming up with creative solutions, by companies, organizations like yours, working with AIC and maybe directly with, the government, and just planting seeds and showing the research. And then eventually maybe something will come up for a vote that's going to change some, bring drastic changes.
So at least some modernization of the interpretation for the adjudicators would be, I think, an easier starting point. And that can be done through internal memos and guidances without congressional approval. And so I think there can be some things, but I think we have to be realistic. The midterms are on everyone's mind already.
Yeah,
unfortunately, exactly. In this country. And so, yeah. Unfortunately, we're in 2-year cycles in this country.
Yeah, the political cycle makes it tough. Well, maybe we'll leave that discussion for another time. Manan, thank you so much. This was awesome, and great conversation. And just I love learning about the what makes you tick, right? And the connection that you have made between your life and your family's journey with all the immigrants. And I genuinely think that you guys probably can bring something really unique for any immigrant founder. So I do hope that folks check you out. I think Unshackled Ventures, is it .com or .vc?
Unshackledvc.com.
Thank you. I apologize. I butchered that. I was somewhere in the middle. So for folks to check you out at unshackledvc.com. And thank you, Manan. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate you, brother.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining. This was awesome. What a great conversation. And just so I know I didn't get to some of your comments, so I just wanted to kind of address them now. I know Manan had to run. But Josh Shacknow says, love this topic and excited to hear more about how startups and immigration coverage converge in the U.S. Well, so far, not that much. And hopefully more will happen. We have an immigrant entrepreneur parole rule now, and sort of that's slowly moving forward. But man, it would be so cool to have an actual visa around that. And Marianne says, love the co-working space scenario. Should be a book and a movie. I'm going to get in touch with Manan afterwards and tell him that, because I imagine, that's one of those eye-opening moments in the movie, right? So I love that. What a great story. And thank you for, I know there's a lot more questions. Francesco, I see your question here. You know what? Reach out for folks here who may have additional questions. Please reach out to Manan, connect with him, connect with their team, see what their offerings are, see what questions they might have, or questions they might be able to answer, or if they can't answer them, maybe they can point you in the right direction. So, I wish we had all the time in the world. Maybe we'll have Manan back on for second part to this show today and answer specific questions. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Francesco, Marianne. A really great conversation. Appreciate it. And I assume I know it doesn't say here, but I'm assuming that this was Alfredo. So thanks, guys, for being here. Sheen, thank you so much for watching, for tuning in, and thank you all for the comments. Again, like this, please leave a comment, share this with folks. I'd love to get these stories out, and of course, see you all next week for another episode with another great guest. In the meantime, have an awesome weekend, everybody. If you're up here in the Northeast or anywhere else where winter is hitting, stay warm and stay safe. Peace out.